I get asked all of the time, which books do I recommend? But the problem is with books is they don't always teach you specific skills. Instead, they provide more of an insight into a way of thinking or an insight into somebody's life, which you can learn or model from. Now, that's not necessarily a problem. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 books that I absolutely recommend to everyone to read. But I'm also going to share with you a couple other resources which aren't books, which I believe everyone must read if they want to be successful, including this document you see here, which I've never actually told anyone about before, but I'm going to share with you at the end of this video. And so the first piece of content you absolutely must read is a Twitter thread by Naval Ravikant, or most people know him as just Naval for short. Naval is a very successful angel investor, famous in the Silicon Valley scene, and he's even featured on Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, Naval springboarded into the limelight when he wrote a Twitter thread in 2018 called How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky. And the whole premise of the Twitter thread is that getting wealthy is not something you do, but it's a skill that you can learn. And so Naval uses the example, if you put him into a foreign country with none of his money and none of his network, it wouldn't be long before he's wealthy again. You've only got to look at plenty of other successful people. They've had continuous levels of success, or where they've lost all of their money and then made it back again. The reason they've been able to do this is because they've learned a specific set of skills and they understand the principles of wealth creation. Now, one of the main points Naval makes is that in order to be successful, you need to arm yourself with specific knowledge, accountability, and leverage. Specific knowledge comes from following your genuine curiosity and passions, and specific knowledge is knowledge that only you have. Accountability refers to taking risks under your name and having a personal brand and putting your name out there. And so in property, that is going to be using your personal brand to attract new deals, to attract new clients, to attract new investors, and putting your reputation on the line, because your reputation is everything you have. Your reputation is your one name that you live with forever. And so by embracing accountability, more people are going to want to work with you because they see you're prepared to put yourself out there. And so Naval prefaces talking about leverage by using the Archimedes quote, "Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand and I will move the earth." And simply put, leverage just refers to things that you can use to increase your output. And he breaks this down into 4 different things. Labor, i.e. having people work for you. Capital, i.e. using other people's money, which can be in the forms of banks and private investors. And then also code and media, both of which have no marginal cost of replication. For example, when you create media, even this video you guys are watching now, I only have to shoot this video once, but it can be viewed an infinite amount of times once that video is shot. And so that's an extremely powerful form of leverage. And so I'm going to link the Twitter thread below this video, but then I also recommend reading this book, which is The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. It was actually written by a gentleman called Eric Jorgensen, and the author essentially went through every single piece of content that Naval has ever created and put all of that advice in an amazing structure in the book. So I highly recommend reading or listening to that. Now, the second thing I recommend reading is actually this book called What It Takes by Stephen Schwartzman. For those that don't know Stephen Schwartzman, he's the founder and CEO of a company called Blackstone, which is the most successful property investment company in the world. As of recording, they currently manage $319 billion of investor funds, and they own and operate a portfolio of $565 billion. You only have to type the name Blackstone into Google and look at the news articles to kind of see the size of transactions that these guys do. And Blackstone are also well known for doing the most profitable real estate deal of all time, where they bought and sold the Hilton Group and netted themselves $14 billion profit in just over 10 years. And so there's a lot of things I love about this book, which I'll touch on in a second. But the first thing is just Stephen Schwartzman's obsession with what he calls a relentless pursuit of excellence in everything that he does, which really comes across in the book. And it's no wonder he's had the success that he's had. And he also talks about the importance of being hyper ambitious and having big goals. What you've got to remember is that Stephen Schwartzman is still alive. He's still the CEO of Blackstone today, even though he founded it many decades ago, which really goes to show what's possible and how big of a company you can build in one lifetime. One of my favorite quotes from the book is that it's as hard to start and run a small business as it is to start a big one. You will suffer the same toll financially and psychologically as you bludgeon it into existence. It's hard to raise the money and to find the right people. So if you're going to dedicate your life to a business, which is the only way it'll ever work, you should choose one with the potential to be huge. And so that quote really aligns with me. You know, I consider myself to be a hyper ambitious individual. And so if I'm going to set goals, I may as well just set huge goals that really excite me. And there's also some really good specific advice in this book, especially around negotiation and the importance of creating win-win scenarios. And also not only the importance, but how to hire an unstoppable team. Within the finance world, Blackstone are known for having some of the best people on their team. And that's because Stephen's obsessed with hiring and cultivating a team of level 10 talent. And so before I move on to the last secret document, the third book I want to recommend is How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, before your eyes roll and you think this is a very generic and almost very common suggestion, I've probably been through this book myself 10 or 15 times. And what's so important about this book is that it teaches you everything you need to know to be great with people and how to prompt changes in people's behavior, how to change their behavior without offending or upsetting them. And it's an easy read and it uses lots of great examples to clarify each point. And Dale Carnegie was just way ahead of his time. As a soft skill, understanding how to communicate effectively is one of the most important things you can learn as early on as possible. And so, for example, in property, when you're negotiating a deal, negotiation is just a form of communication. Negotiation just isn't about going back and forth with numbers and trying to find a middle ground. Negotiation is about trying to get the other party to see things from your perspective, trying to get them to align with your beliefs. And the more effectively you can do that, the more success you're going to have in your negotiations, and ultimately the more deals you're going to be able to do. And finally, one of the most important pieces of business content I think everyone should read, and also one of the most interesting things I've ever read, is this: Amazon Letters to Shareholders. So we've all heard of the company Amazon. Now what's so interesting is that since 1997, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, wrote a letter to shareholders every single year. So the fact that one of the most successful individuals in the world, who built one of the most successful companies in the world, has documented that journey for the last 25 years is pretty incredible. Now there's a huge amount of takeaways in these letters, but one of the things that stuck out to me the most was Jeff's obsession with long-term thinking. And in his first letter in 1997, he says it's all about the long term. And he follows on by saying, because of our emphasis on the long term, we may make decisions and weigh trade-offs differently than other companies. Accordingly, we want to share with you our fundamental management and decision-making approach so that you, our shareholders, may confirm that it is consistent with your investment philosophy. And so then he essentially goes on to outline his entire decision-making framework and explain how, as the CEO of Amazon, they were going to make decisions moving forward. And the first one, which is my favorite, is that we will continue to make investment decisions in light of long-term market leadership considerations rather than short-term profitability considerations or short-term Wall Street reactions. Essentially saying he didn't really care what happened to the share price in the long term. He didn't really care about trying to hit a certain profit figure by the end of the quarter or the end of the year to satisfy Wall Street. And so one thing you'll see that's very common amongst successful people is they don't make decisions that get them instant gratification. They think about the second, the third, and the fourth order consequences, i.e. from the decisions I make today, what are the results I get in the future? For example, if you decide to go out on the weekend and get drunk, that first order consequence is, yeah, you're going to have a good time, you're going to have fun, but the second order consequence is that you're going to wake up hungover, you're not going to feel great. And then the third order consequence of that is you're probably not going to be very productive, you're not going to get much work done. And then the consequence of that is X, Y, Z, and it goes on and on and on. The most successful people in the world, including people like Jeff Bezos, are prepared to put off this gratification for as long as possible to get an even bigger payoff in the future. A level of sacrifice that is probably incomprehensible to people like you and I. And so really Bezos was just a grandmaster chess player. He was constantly thinking 10 moves ahead of his competition. And as we've seen over the last 25 or so years, they've become one of the most valuable companies in doing so. And he didn't want to build the easiest business or the cheapest business. His mindset is, what can we build that is so complex, so expensive, and so big that if anybody tries to compete with us, they just won't be able to. And so I encourage you, if you want to try and compete with Amazon, try and build a store where you can sell as many products as they can, and sell those products at a cheaper price than they can and deliver them quicker than they can. You just can't. And now one of the biggest logistics companies in the world, just through their Amazon Prime network, they're just at a point now where all of the competitors of Amazon were trying to please investors and shareholders on a quarterly and yearly basis by hitting certain profit targets. Bezos was just spending more and more money and pushing himself through more and more pain and sacrifice to get that big payoff in the long term. And I think the advice people can take away from that is when they're building a business, whether it's a property investing business or something else, embrace the hard. You want it to be hard, because the harder it is, the less people they're going to be competing with you, and be prepared to play long-term games. If we go back to Naval Ravikant, which I talked about at the start of this video, one of the tweets in his Twitter thread was also play long-term games with long-term people. And so it's a recurring theme you see amongst the hyper successful. And so hopefully that provided some guidance for you guys. Remember, none of the knowledge you learn from these books means anything without taking action. So get to work.